Díomh Dina agus fáilte go dtí a Cuddy Brehon is mise cuimhín of Flanagan. Hello everybody, you're very welcome to the Brehon Academy. I'm Kevin Flanagan, and in tonight's show we're going to be doing something a little bit different. A few weeks ago I interviewed Cuddy, but the audio wasn't great. So I decided to go into his live show and record it with his permission, and I'm going to share that with you tonight. But before I do, just to remind you once again to please check out the BrehonAcademy.org. That's where you're going to find information about all of my online courses. That's Early Irish Culture and Society, Irish Mythology, and the Brehon Laws of Early Ireland. We also have a blog over there where you'll find lots of articles. And we also have a merchandise store where you're going to be able to buy lovely t-shirts just like this. And I've actually just added a few new designs to the store, so you can help me out by purchasing a piece of merch, whether that's a t-shirt, a poster, or a mug. We also have membership, so if you want to support me on a monthly basis, please consider doing so. We have 6 levels and they start for as little as $1.99 per month. Now, with all of that being said, let's jump into the live recording of Cuddy, and he's going to be talking about the SAGA of Cú Chulainn. Oh, and before we do that, I'm going to include up here, I'm going to include a QR code which you can scan and leave Cuddy a review, because that's really going to help him out with his future endeavors and his future career as a storyteller. So if you enjoy this, please consider leaving him a review.
Okay, everybody. So the next 2 sections will focus on Cú Chulainn, fascinating character. Okay, half man, half god. He was the son of 𝗹𝗶, who we mentioned, very much linked with light and the sun. His great-grandfather was Balor of the evil eye, of a really dark and evil race called the 𝗹𝗵𝗲𝗀𝗀. So that definitely left his mark on Cú Chulainn. So although he was a mostly good character, he would go into fits of rage. And when he was under the influence of this rage, he could be a danger to anyone, not just his enemies. So he's a very conflicted character, you know, and a very interesting one, because he shows all aspects of the human psyche. You know, we're neither good nor bad. We have everything in us, and the mythology really expresses that about him. You know, it reminds me of Batman Christian Bale, Batman. Well, he reminds me of that, because Batman's clearly the good guy in the movie, but when you see him, you're kind of afraid, and you're kind of like, is he going to hurt anyone in the room? Cú Chulainn always struck me as someone like that, you know. And it shows you that these same kind of personalities keep appearing in our stories, because they're talking about us ourselves, you know. So you're going to hear stuff like the 𝗹𝗶៌𝗀𝗀 mentioned. That's the 4th of the 𝗹𝗶 Knights. The 𝗹𝗶 Knights are going to be mentioned. They were the elite defenders of Ulster, the northern province of Ireland. You're going to hear hurling mentioned. We have a very old sport here called hurling, national sport. It's played with a long stick with a flat surface and a small, hard wooden ball, okay? As I said, ancient sport, and that sport will feature heavily in the first story. The ball, by the way, is called a sliotar. And originally, okay, these were hunting tools. That's why the ball is so hard. You could bash them and hit them. So yeah, that will be featured. So also, I need to tell you as well about the importance of cattle in this Gaelic Celtic culture. They didn't really use money like gold and silver money, you know. The main form of money was cattle, okay? So it wasn't really like a capitalistic society, you know, so you have to understand it in that context. But cattle were the main form of money, big transactions, buying land or paying tribute to the chieftain. That would take place with cattle. So knowing that, having a stud bull, where you can breed your cows with it, that's kind of like having your own money machine, in a way, you know. So there'd be like cattle raids going on where they try and take the cows, especially stud bulls. So that will feature very prominently in the second story. So how this is going to go in this part is that I'm going to tell you one story about how he got his name, and then I'm going to start the second story, which is probably the most famous story that he's associated with, of which there's so many in his life. That's called the Cattle Raid of Cooley, okay, with Queen Maeve as well. Great story, one of my favourites. So like I said, I'll do like half of that, and then we'll get to a kind of a cliffhanger moment, and then we'll finish that part. And then the third part, we'll finish that story, and then we'll talk about the death of Cú Chulainn, which is another great story. By the way, actually, in terms of his death, so he didn't care about living a long life. He only cared about that his name would be remembered, okay? So we had a very famous event here called the 1916 Easter Rising, okay? And one of the leaders, Padraig Pearse, was very familiar with Irish mythology, and he was using the spirit and the name of Cú Chulainn to inspire Irish people to rise up in rebellion, even if the odds weren't very favourable. And so the way he died was a very, very strong way, and that's why in the GPO, the General Post Office, where it was the most famous site of the 1916 Rising, there's a statue of Cú Chulainn in the window with the final scene of the final story that I'm going to depict for you, you know. So just links back as well that all this mythology is really woven into our culture here, you know, so you'll know what I mean by the end of the story. So I'm going to go into storyteller mode now, okay? And I'm going to start telling you the first story, how we got his name. He will be the one who rises in the dark, when the faces fall, when the panicked cries start, when many have fallen and by magic dismounted. He will stand tall, his tally uncounted. Cú Chulainn was half man, half god. His mother was 𝗹𝗶𝗀𝗀𝗪, who was the sister of the King of Ulster, and his father was the sun god Lugh. The great druid 𝗹𝗶H had the sight that allowed him to see the light emanating from all living creatures. And when he saw that babe in 𝗹𝗶𝗀𝗪's arms for the first time, he told all present that the light of his power was blinding. Cú Chulainn's life was short but shocking, like a shooting star that blazes and fades in flight. He was loyal and passionate, but took offence at the slightest insult, and at these times his fury was so great that one would shudder to recall it. But Cú Chulainn was not born by that name. He earned it. He was born by the name of 𝗁𝗏𝗏, and I'll tell you how this happened. 𝗁𝗏𝗏 had been raised away from King Conor's court, for King Conor was wary of having one so touched by the gods, so close to his court, should the lords decide to rally around the young boy instead of him. But one day, when 𝗁𝗏𝗏 was 8 years old, he decided to go to King Conor's court, 𝗹𝗶𝗻𝗀𝗀, to claim the martial training and education that was his birthright. And he set out with nothing else except his hurl and his sliotar. When he arrived at the grounds, he saw a group of older lads playing hurling. 𝗁𝗏𝗏𝗏 was a very talented hurler, so uninvited, he joined the game, and he very quickly scored a goal. Now these young lads, they were all training to be in the Red Branch Knights themselves. They didn't like this young kid coming in and making them look bad, so they attacked him. Yet before long, several of them were lying unconscious on the ground, several more nursing stinging fingers, red welts on their legs. 𝗁𝗏𝗏𝗏 was being circled by the final 4 lads when King Conor strode down out of nowhere and called them off. And a crowd had gathered to watch the fight, and they stood watching very keenly to see what would happen next. Conor's solemn grey eyes met the green eyes of this flame-haired youth before him, and he ordered him to identify himself. 𝗁𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 drew himself up to his full height and spoke with a confidence that belied his young years as he said, "My name is 𝗁𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, the son of 𝗹𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, your sister. I have come to claim what is my right, the martial training and education that befits a prince." Those closest to Conor saw him flex his neck slightly in discomfort, but his sharp mind calculated that it would be better to accept 𝗁𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 in that moment than publicly reject him and make an enemy for life. And so he filled his lungs and he bellowed for the watching crowd, "You are welcome, 𝗁𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, the son of 𝗹𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. We can see you have the makings of a mighty warrior, and so we shall indeed train you in the arts of war." And so the seasons flowed from one to another and back again, and 𝗁𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 thrived in his new surroundings as his strength and his speed soared. Though not of any great height, he was swifter of hand and foot than the others. He grew leaner, more enduring, with iron-like muscle and sinew. One day, Conor and his men were passing by 𝗁𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 as he was playing hurling. And they were going on a visit to pay a visit to his loyal blacksmith Cullen, who had served him loyally for many years. And they invited 𝗙𝗲𝗃 to join. 𝗙𝗃𝗃 told them that he would, as soon as the game was done. But the game went on longer than he expected. And by the time 𝗙𝗃𝗃 was making his way through Cullen's grounds, the sun had set and a chill had settled over the woods that he passed through. Earlier that day, Conor, Cullen and his men had gone out hunting. And in a wild and exhilarating hunt, they had finally caught the deer that they had been chasing. And they brought it back to the homestead. They began preparing it. And as they were preparing it, they all started to drink. And while this was going on, Cullen came to Conor and said, "Shall I release the great Irish wolfhound that guards my grounds while we're relaxing and enjoying ourselves?" And amidst all the excitement, King Conor forgot about his invitation to 𝗙𝗃𝗃. And he said, "Yes, let it prowl free." But where was 𝗙𝗃𝗃? 𝗙𝗃𝗃 was making his way through Cullen's grounds with nothing else except his hurl and his sliotar. And suddenly he heard a savage growl, and he looked up to see a fierce wolfhound sprinting towards him with its jaws snapping. In the homestead, they also heard the sound, and they were like, "Oh, fuck." And they rushed out to see the great beast bearing down 𝗙𝗃𝗃, ready to tear him apart. Look at that, done to many in the past. And its snarl was peeling its flesh right back onto its head, and the froth gathering around its canine teeth made it seem to 𝗙𝗃𝗃 like this beast had jumped from the depths itself as it bounded towards him. But 𝗙𝗃𝗃 remained calm, for in him ran the blood of the gods, and he knew himself to be a master of all of the beasts of war. And so calmly, like an artist of destruction, he threw up that sliotar and he hit it as hard as he could with his hurl. And the sliotar soared through the air and struck the bristling beast in its slavering mouth, smashing through its teeth before erupting out of the back of its skull. The hound fell to the earth dead, and silence rang around the grounds. And the silence was only broken by a great lament from Cullen, for he had raised that hound from the very first day of his life to be the greatest protector in the whole province. In fact, 3 generations of hound he had raised, and they had become more fierce and more ferocious with every generation. 𝗙𝗃𝗃 was dismayed at the anguish on Cullen's face, and so he stepped forward and he said, "Cullen, sadness is on my heart at these events. Until the day you find another hound, raise him and train him to protect these grounds, then I will guard your grounds instead." And all of the onlookers were amazed at the nobility of this offer from this young child, and they agreed that he should be given a new name to mark the occasion. And so King Conor decided that from then forth, 𝗙𝗃𝗃 should be known as Cú Chulainn, which translates from Irish into English as the Hound of Cullen. Sinead got dinner, that's the end of that story. So, we're going to fast forward now 9 years, okay? And like I said, this is an extremely famous one. This is the Cattle Raid of Cooley. And so now we come to perhaps the most famous chapter in Cú Chulainn's life, a series of events that bound 2 names together forever in our histories: the Hound of Ulster, Cú Chulainn, and the wild and beautiful Maeve, the Witch Queen of Connacht. I've told you much of Cú Chulainn, so allow me to tell you of Queen Maeve. It was said that some of the old magic of Eire flowed in her veins, that she was of the land itself, of the cold rivers and misty glens, and of the valiant thistle that forced its way up through the stark Connacht rock. She had flowing amber hair and green eyes that shone like emeralds from the lean, tightly angled face of a hunter. In addition, she was delicate and careful in her cunning, yet ruthless in her ambition. Her husband was a Lil, many years her junior, rich, proud in the saddle, yet not consumed by the fiery desire for more that burned so strongly in his wife. So the marriage went well at first, until one day they were out walking, and they became embroiled in an argument about who was richer. And by the end of it, they said that they would do a great count of their wealth to see who was right. They agreed that the count would be held by Fergus of Ulster, seen as being neutral between them. And Fergus had crossed loyalty from Ulster to Connacht after King Conor had committed a great betrayal against one of his allies. And so Fergus ordered the servants to gather up all of their gold and silver, all of their precious ornaments, all of their deeds to all their lands, and they made 2 great piles before him. Yet when he counted them all up, he found that they were equal. And so he said, "We shall call in their herds." So he called in all their sheep. He counted each and every one. But they were equal. Next he called in their horses. He counted each horse that they had. But they were equal. Finally, he called in their cattle, the most important. And when he counted them all up, he found that they were not equal. 𝗹𝗶𝗍𝗀 had one thing that 𝗹𝗶 did not. A hulking, virile, white stud bull by the name of 𝗙𝗵𝗲𝗀𝗀. And people travelled from all over Ireland with their milk cows to avail of his powers. Let's call him his powers. And so 𝗹𝗶 had to admit that 𝗹𝗶 was in fact richer. But was she going to let this lie? No, she wasn't. Her face twisted and sharpened in fury as she demanded of Fergus to know if there was any bull in Ireland that could match 𝗙𝗵𝗲𝗀𝗀. And Fergus answered through gritted teeth, for he knew what the honest answer would lead to. And he told her that there was. And that was the brown bull of Cooley in Ulster. And it was said that 20 men could sit on its back, and that the calves it seeded were born as thick as tree trunks. A distant look entered 𝗹𝗶's eyes as she turned from Fergus and looked towards the mountains of the north, as she breathed to herself these words: "I am of this land, of this earth. Its breath flows through me like the passing of time. That brown bull is in Cooley, but he will be mine, and my legend will grow, and my glory will shine." And so she sent Fergus up to the owner of the bull with a very generous offer. The offer was 50 milk cows, the finest piece of land in Connacht, and a golden chariot, simply for the lend of the bull for a year and a day, so that she could set him to her herds and create the greatest herd in Ireland. However, Dara rejected the offer and sent Fergus back to 𝗹𝗶 with the message that the bull was staying where it was. So what did 𝗹𝗶 do? 𝗹𝗶 beat and pounded upon the drums of war. She called up all the finest warriors in Connacht and amassed them on the borders of Ulster, ready to strike into Cooley. And she was especially confident of victory because the Red Branch Knights, the defenders of Ulster, were struck down by a curse called the Pangs of Ulster. And this cursed them to be stricken by the pains of female labour at the time of their greatest need. And this was because King Conor had forced Macha of the 𝗹𝗶𝗍𝗀𝗀 to take part in a chariot race when she was heavily pregnant. And she had experienced so much pain during this race that she cursed the fully grown warriors of Ulster, fully grown, to feel the same pain that she had at the time of her greatest need. And so Ulster was defenceless. Yet as they gathered, 𝗹𝗶's blind seeress 𝗷𝗶𝗍𝗀 had a vision, and she told her, "I see red, a ripping, rolling red of the dead. A darkness falls upon the land, a kingdom torn asunder. A fearsome force on the opposing side with blades that roar like thunder." 𝗹𝗶 implored her to continue, demanding if she saw victory amongst the chaos. And 𝗹𝗍 continued, "I see not defeat nor victory, but death aplenty. A single warrior standing in a river of blood, with blinding light shining from where he is stood." At this, Fergus turned away and he growled, "There is only one warrior that could be. Still 1 year short of the age of a man, and so unaffected by the curse. And his name is Cú Chulainn. Sinead Gogden, that's the end of part 2, okay? You're all good. And his name is Cú Chulainn. That evening, Cú Chulainn sat there on a hillside on the other side of the plains, and as he watched the dark smoke drift up from the campfires into the blood-red sunset, he spoke to himself and he said, "Let them come, let them break like water on rock. I will dash them, smash them like some desperate fleet. Their courage will rise, but I will crush them all, and at my feet their lifeless bodies will fall." And so the time came, and they arrived at the border, and Cú Chulainn was standing there, strong and fearless, ready to face Queen Maev's entire army. Having patiently perfected his discipline, having resolutely waited for the right moment to reveal himself, he stood there proud, in full confidence of victory. But he was wise. He knew he could not take them all on at the same time, and so he invoked the sacred right of single combat to face each of them individually. And he called out to them, and his voice ripped into their hearts like thunder ripping through the night sky as he roared, "The greed that fuels you will lead to nothing. For those who bring death to my land will receive only destruction. Come forth now, warriors, meet your fate. My blades have a thirst that only your blood will sate." And so, one by one, the finest warriors in Maev's army came, and one by one they fell to Cú Chulainn's blades. And just as the Dom had seen, the river that divided the provinces ran red with their blood. After scores of men had fallen, Maeve even sent Cú Chulainn's own uncle, Fergus of Ulster, against him. People bowed their heads at the sight, for surely this was against the will of the gods to order such family to slay each other. Yet, standing tall and proud, the old warrior walked to meet his death. But Cú Chulainn refused to face him. Even the squirrels in the trees knew how unfair this contest would be. Instead, he agreed to give ground to Fergus on the condition that Fergus would do the same for him or his allies at some point in the future. And Fergus agreed, and he returned to Maeve's camp. And Maeve was enraged that they would not fight. But Fergus had fulfilled her order to challenge the Hound of Ulster, so there was nothing she could do. Yet all the while this was going on, Cú Chulainn could not keep his mind from one warrior who he knew to be in the ranks of Maeve's army. One who was a friend, almost a brother to him. Their friendship had formed when they had trained together under a martial trainer called Scott in the North Sea. And there, as the rain had lashed their skin and the wind had screamed like a banshee, they had ran together, climbed together, sparred together, and as the cold had wormed its way into their very bones, they had drawn strength from each other's presence. The warrior's name was 𝗙𝗪𝗟𝗪, towering with long black hair, body thickly laced with muscle. Some said the blood of those from the Middle Sea far to the south of Ireland ran in his veins. Others said that he himself was descended from Sreng, who had chopped the arm from King Nuada of the Tuatha Danann at the Battle of 𝗏𝗏. Many tales could be told about 𝗙𝗪𝗟𝗪's life, but all I will say is this. There had been a time when he had known how many men had fallen to his weapons, but those days had long since passed, lost in the mists of time, mists that snaked through the eye sockets of the skulls of those who dared to challenge him. On account of the history, 𝗙𝗪𝗟𝗪 had been refusing to challenge Cú Chulainn, and given his previous exploits, all knew that it was not cowardice that held his blade. Yet Maeve started to spread rumours, saying that Cú Chulainn had been calling him a coward, saying that he had never been a match for him while they trained together on Scott's Island, saying that it would be easy to strike him down. Though that seeded doubt in 𝗙𝗪𝗟𝗪's mind, what finally succeeded in turning him was that as they ate together one night, Maeve noticed that 𝗙𝗪𝗟𝗪 could not keep his eyes off her daughter Finiver that was sitting beside her. and she saw her chance. And she said, "Fair to you, if you kill Cú Chulainn, you can have my daughter's hand in marriage." And fair to you, lost in a lake of lies and lust, agreed. And so the next morning he marched out to face Cú Chulainn. The champions met in full armour that glinted cruelly in the first morning sun, as the two wolves of Ireland prepared to unleash themselves on each other, and even the wild animals burrowing in the fields stopped to watch as Ireland held its breath. They met at the river ford that split the provinces. First, they bowed low and hailed each other with words of respect. But then they began to fight. And this was the greatest contest in the history of Éire. They fought for 3 whole days in a battle of wills, each of them wielding similar skills. They fought with sword, they fought with shield, they fought with spear, they fought with javelin, and though each wounded the other, neither man seemed to be affected. This was a heroic fight, but there was nothing beautiful about it. It was bloody, it was brutal, and their flesh was ripped and rendered, and blood exploded from their bodies, painting green or rusted red. Yet, at the end of each day, each sent aid to the other. Cú Chulainn sent fair to you herbs for his wounds, and fair to you sent Cú Chulainn food and drink. On the 4th day, Cú Chulainn began to tire, for he had been fighting for so long previously, and fair to you landed a deep blow with his spear into Cú Chulainn's side, and it looked like the end was near. But Cú Chulainn still had one more move to make. For that martial trainer Scott had taught him, and him alone, due to his god blood, how to summon the 𝗙𝗵𝗟𝗀𝗀. The 𝗙𝗵𝗟𝗀𝗀 was an ancient spear made from the bones of sea monsters from deep at the bottom of the Irish Sea. He raised his bloody hand and he summoned the 𝗙𝗵𝗟𝗀𝗀. It soared through the air and landed in his hand, and when it landed, he hurled it with all his might that fair to you. The 𝗙𝗵𝗟𝗀𝗀 cut through fair to you's armour like a shark through the open water. It sliced seamlessly through the flesh, muscle and bone of his chest and pierced him deep in the heart. Fair to you fell first to his knees, desperately trying to utter a final word to his friend before he collapsed to his side, dead. Upon his fall, Cú Chulainn rushed to pick up his dead friend in his arms, and the tears flowed freely down his cheeks as he cursed May's greed, and he cried, "Fair to you, I have slain you, in the end you have fallen. Only a god could kill you, no mortal man could. I will absorb your spirit into my very bones, fair to you, of stone join my heart and my blood." Eventually, exhausted, Cú Chulainn retreated into a cave to recover, and he fell into a deep sleep. And seeing her chance, Maeve took her army and they rushed into Ulster and they seized the brown bull and they dragged it back to Connacht. And as they were trying to drag it into its pen, it was bellowing so loudly that the white bull 𝗵𝗵𝗀𝗀 heard the bellows, and he rushed forward to defend his territory. Upon seeing 𝗵𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀, the brown bull broke free from his captors and he rushed to meet 𝗵𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀's challenge, and they began to fight. For what no one knew was that the souls of these beasts had clashed in many different forms throughout the ages, as bears, as boars, as wolves, and as eagles. And as they clashed, the sounds that erupted from them sounded as though they came from raging gods themselves, and the earth shook underfoot as they battled their way across the land. Walls were run through, homesteads destroyed, and anyone who was caught betwixt them was smashed and broken. They fought for a whole day and a whole night, as men lay awake at the sound and babes cried in terror in their mother's arms. The next day, the people of Ireland awoke to find that the brown bull of Cooley had killed 𝗵𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀. Breathing raggedly from its mighty lungs, it staggered around Connacht with the 𝗵𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀's remains hanging gruesomely from his horns. But the bull had been badly wounded in a dozen places, and blood flowed freely from its giant frame. Its instinct demanded that it return to Cooley, So it began to make its way there, and none tried to stop it, for the bull's wounds were so great that its value had clearly been destroyed. When it got back to Cooley, it was so maddened and enraged that it attacked the very mountains themselves as though they were merely another enemy to be vanquished. Yet its horns became locked in the unforgiving rock, and so great was the struggle to break them free, and so great was the blood loss from his wounds that the bull's heart exploded and it collapsed and died. And all that was left behind was a land ravaged by the pride and wrath of Maeve, the cruel Queen of Connacht. Yet the bull's wild strength soaked into the land of the north and was absorbed by the Irish men and women there, a strength that would never leave them, no matter how great the trial or test. Sinead got in it. That's the end of that story. But am I good? During his career as a warrior, sorry, before that, a few more years have passed now, okay? Okay. Yeah. During his career as a warrior, Cú Chulainn killed many men, and it was always foretold that it would be the sons and daughters of one of the men that he killed that would in turn kill him. One of the men that he struck down during the Cattle Raid of Cooley was a man by the name of 𝗙𝗲𝗟𝗪. 𝗙𝗲𝗪𝗪 left behind a pregnant wife, and when she gave birth to sextuplets. 3 daughters and 3 sons. She was also a sorceress, and as she raised them, she imbued in them all the dark arts of sorcery, and she also instilled in them that when they were old enough, it was upon them to avenge their father's death. Now, Cú Chulainn knew nothing of this, so he continued on with his life. But when the time was ripe, the sons and daughters of 𝗙𝗲𝗪𝗪 set out to kill the man who had killed their father. And as they left, the eldest son, Lugaid Cú spoke, and he said, "Too many he has slain, this son wolf of pain, left without a father all of our lives. Our rage rises like thunder, barely contained. We are the offsprings of 𝗙𝗲𝗪𝗪, like the moon we will rise." Now, Cú Chulainn didn't know, but King Conor did. And a spy had told him that the offspring were coming to seek revenge, that plants withered as they passed, that trees turned their branches inwards to avoid the toxic rage that had poisoned their hearts. Normally, King Conor was not one to doubt Cú Chulainn. He had come to love and respect him deeply, but he also knew that the wheel of fate was stronger than any mortal. He also knew that if Cú Chulainn was to hear of this challenge, he would rush to face them. His honour and his fiery temperament allowed no other course of action. He also feared that if Cú Chulainn was to fall, his own great fort, the 𝗹𝗶𝗀𝗀𝗪, would also fall. As he watched dark clouds form on the horizon, he confided in his wife, and he said, "He hungers for battle like a wolf hungers for flesh. I have seen reason leave him and take to the skies. And so comes the thunder, the war, the fire, the blood. Red branches can break, but if Cú Chulainn falls, we will die." He decided to distract his great champion. He called him to the 𝗹𝗶𝗀𝗪𝗪, and he organised many sporting games inside the grounds. And the sons and daughters of 𝗙𝗲𝗪𝗪 arrived outside, and they used their dark fairy magic to brew up the sounds of war. They stamped their feet, they smashed their swords on their shields, and they let out great cries and screams of the dying, for they knew that Cú Chulainn would not be able to resist the sounds of battle. But Cú Chulainn was so engrossed in the games that he could not hear them. When the games were done, King Conor organised a feast, and there was so much singing and drinking and revelry that still Cú Chulainn could not hear all the noise coming from outside. And what a din they made too, as their eyes bulged in hatred and their screams rent through the air as rabbits rushed into warrens and woodlice crowded back into bark. Inside, King Conor knew he could not keep this up forever, and the sweat that ran down his temple was not merely from the heavy meat and the roaring fire. When he was informed that the offspring had briefly retreated, he announced that Cú Chulainn would go for a hunt in the 𝗙𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪, in English, the Valley of the Deaf, because no sound could be entered from the outside. And so he was in the 𝗙𝗵𝗀𝗀. The sons and daughters of Calajan arrived outside. They used their fairy magic to brew up the sounds of war, yet still he could not hear them. And so they knew they had to change their tactics. And so one of the daughters of Calajan cleverly crafted herself into the form of her Cú Chulainn's friend Niamh, and in that form she could slip through the locks that stopped the entry of enemies to the 𝗙𝗵𝗀𝗀. And when inside, she spied Cú Chulainn, and she embraced him with desperate eyes and panic breath, and she told him that the Red Branch Knights were in battle and that they desperately needed his help. And so, of course, Cú Chulainn rushed to get ready for war. He went to hitch his warhorse, the wild-spirited warhorse 𝗙𝗵𝗲𝗀𝗀. Yet as he tried to place the reins on her, she pulled her head away from him and showed him the whites of her eyes. Cú Chulainn was shocked. He tried to place the reins on her again. Again, she pulled away. A third time he tried, and again she pulled away. This time, he admonished her. He said, 𝗙𝗵𝗲𝗀𝗀, in all the battles we have fought, in all the victories we have sought, your heart was strong and straight and true, yet this is fear I see in you. At this, 𝗙𝗵𝗲𝗀𝗀 snorted quietly, bowed her head, and allowed him to place the reins on her. But as he did so, she cried 2 great tears of blood. He hitched 𝗙𝗵𝗲𝗀𝗀 to his chariot, and he was joined by his charioteer Laig, strong, loyal Laig. And as they were leaving the valley to ride for war, Cú Chulainn's mother 𝗹𝗶𝗍𝗀 came to them with a goblet of wine as a blessing to drink before battle. Cú Chulainn lifted it to his lips, but the fluid was thick, and he gagged as he realized that the wine had turned to blood. He spat it out. She took it from him, emptied it, refilled it with wine, but the same thing happened. A third time they tried, and again it turned to blood. 𝗹𝗶𝗍𝗀 pleaded with her son not to go forth, but Cú Chulainn refused to hide where his comrades were dying, and so they were forced to leave without 𝗹𝗶𝗍𝗀's blessing. They were travelling down the road when they passed by 3 old hags roasting a hound on the roadside. They called out to him. They said, Cú Chulainn, eat with us. Now Cú Chulainn was under a sacred oath, a 𝗙𝗍𝗀, never to eat the flesh of the hound, given his name. So he politely tried to decline. But then they began to jeer him. They say, Cú Chulainn, you've been eating too long with the king, and you think yourself above us. Cú Chulainn's honour as a warrior would not allow him to think or act as if he was above anybody else. So he climbed down from his chariot and he joined their circle. He found the stench of the roasting flesh unpleasant as he looked around at faces that had eyes that shone from wrinkled faces with a sharp alertness. A strange feeling had settled over him, and when the meat was ready, surprisingly, he decided to take a bite. In caution, he picked it up with his left hand instead of his right. But as soon as the flesh touched his lips, the strength fled from his left hand. It dropped onto his left leg. As soon as it touched his left leg, the strength fled from his left leg. Suddenly, Cú Chulainn was desperate to get away from these mysterious crones who smelled of death and decay. Unsteady, Cú Chulainn arose, knowing that he had lost half his strength right before battle. And as he left, the 3 old hags began to laugh and cackle. And as they did, they changed into the form of one giant raven. And this raven was the 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗀, the goddess of war. And she had offered Cú Chulainn her love in the past, and he had rejected her. And this was his punishment for rejecting her love. Our trio, Cú Chulainn, Laig, and 𝗙𝗵𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀, continued down the road where they were challenged by the 3 sons of Calajan. The first son stepped forward and he hurled the spear at Cú Chulainn, but his aim was not true. Instead, he pierced Laig right through the neck. He fell to the ground dead, returning to the land that had birthed him, and so fell Laig, king among the charioteers. Cú Chulainn roared in rage, and the veins bulged in his neck, and the red froth foamed at his mouth, and his face was frightening to look upon as he tore that spear up, and he hurled it at the first son with such force that he impaled into a tree in the distance. Forward stepped the second son of Calajan, and he hurled his spear at Cú Chulainn, His aim was better, so Cú Chulainn had to block the blow which broke his shield, and the ricochet continued its lightning journey and buried itself deep into the heart of 𝗙𝗵𝗲𝗀𝗀. The great horse fell to the ground with a tremendous scream, and so fell 𝗙𝗵𝗲𝗀𝗀, queen among horses. For a moment, time stopped as Cú Chulainn watched his beloved steed lying on the ground. And then the rage rushed back, red and black and terrible, and the sound erupted from him that was more animal than human as he tore that spear up and hurled it at the second son with such force that tears of flame flowed from the air as it killed the second son. Thus Laig and 𝗙𝗵𝗲𝗀𝗀 were well avenged, for those that dwell in darkness love it when one is slain by the same weapon with which they used to kill. With a howl, forward stepped Lugaid Cúree, the third son of Calajan, with sharp spear in hand and vicious vengeance in his heart. And he hurled it at a weakened, unprotected Cú Chulainn, and he pierced him deep in the abdomen. And as Cú Chulainn felt the hideous pain of it rush up to catch the breath in his throat, he immediately knew that he had been mortally wounded. There was a group of trees by the roadside, and he retreated into them, but his enemies were hesitant to follow because they were unsure if Cú Chulainn was merely laying a trap for them. Yet on the other side of the trees, Cú Chulainn pulled out the spear in agony. He fell down to his hands and knees, and there was a darkness creeping into his field of vision. He knew he was dying. In the distance, he saw a standing stone, and he decided that he was not going to die on his hands and knees like an animal. And so he crawled over there, and he pulled himself upright. And with his back to the standing stone, he tied himself upright around it. And it was there, with a sword in his hand, that he was letting out his last breaths, and all he could see was faces. So many faces. Faces of the men that he had killed and the women that had shared his bed. And he spoke to himself for the final time, and he said, "Remember how you fought when you had nothing left, a heart of oak so great it might burst through your chest. Remember the pain sting like the blackness of sin, like the whiteness of the fire that burned deep within. Remember you widened your eyes and flashed out your tongue, and remember how they burned at your blade of the sun." And it was there that Cú Chulainn let out his last breath. Eventually, his enemies came through the trees, and all they could see in the distance was Cú Chulainn standing there with a sword in his hand, ready to face them. And they could not believe that he had been so badly wounded, yet still had the strength to fight. And so they were afraid to approach. And they waited there for hours, afraid to approach. And it was only when the Morrigan slowly circled out of the sky and landed on Cú Chulainn's shoulder, let out a caw so great that those who heard it said that it sounded like a woman's scream. Then, and only then, did they know that Cú Chulainn was dead. And so died Cú Chulainn, king among all the warriors of 𝗹𝗶𝗍. Sinead got dinner. That's the end of your show. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. 𝗙𝗵𝗲𝗀𝗀. Thank you so much. So you know what? I started the show in October 2023. No one's really doing anything like this. As all things are, it was slow to get off the ground. You know, I'd be here to have two people, maybe people, me friends would be coming. I'd be trying outside, trying to get people to come in. Quiet shows, not known. But I saw this in my mind. Exactly what I'm looking at now is exactly what I saw. A mix of tourists and Irish people that live here. Full room, because I knew that these stories are great. And if you build it, they'll come, you know. So like, it feels absolutely amazing now, about 18 months later, to see what I was envisioning. So like, thank you so much for, yeah. The stories are great. The stories, it's a two-way thing, you know. I can tell the stories, but the stories also need an audience, or the useless, you know. So like the fact that you can come here and listen as well, and thanks so much for your engagement as well. It was a lot of fun. I could feel that you were involved in the stories as well. So I really enjoyed that, you know. So thank you for helping to keep this ancient part of our culture alive. You know, for anyone who knows anything about our history, we suffered a lot and we had so much of our culture ripped from us. But we're getting it back bit by bit. You know, the language is getting a bit of a revival as well. This is my own little part. So thank you for coming and supporting Irish culture and a very old Irish culture and keeping it going into the future as well. So 𝗙𝗲𝗟𝗪𝗪𝗀𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗙 I have cards. If anyone wants my card with my website, social media, feel free to take it. And one thing I'd ask is please leave a review of this show. Go on. See these barcodes there? The big ones there on the red and also right there. It means so much. I'm very sure that a lot of you went and checked reviews and saw if there's any good and saw the nice number. So if you could please leave your mark and just leave a review, I'd be so grateful. That is it now, guys. You are free to go. Thanks so much for your attention. Good amount of well. Thank you.